Good morning. My name is Heather Bauman, and I'm honored to be your worship associate today. At the end of 2022, I was in my prime. My husband, Danny, and I went on a vacation of a lifetime visiting Egypt, which is somewhere I've always wanted to go. When we got back, we finally took in our first foster child, which is something I've always wanted to do. On top of all this, I was working towards a major career shift to become a police officer so I could help others in crisis. And I was in high standing with 3 different progressive departments. I finally felt like I was starting to make something of my life to help others. Well, just a few months later, everything changed. All of the progress I had made in my physical fitness was quickly deteriorating. I thought, maybe I'm just stressed. I tried very hard to get enough sleep, fuel my body well, and practice my de-stressing skills. But no matter how much I tried, nothing worked. Because of this, I had to back out of consideration to all the police departments. We had to send our foster child to another placement, and I even had to go on medical leave of my job of 10 years. Fast forward 3 years now, I'm chronically ill and disabled. You can see that I'm standing here without aid. I'm speaking, I'm dressed. I walked up to the podium without my cane. But what you don't see is the preparation that went before this and how I will suffer after. For those without chronic illness, I can see how this doesn't make sense. How can you hide an illness? Why would you need a cane one day and not the next? My favorite way to explain this is called spoon theory. Spoon theory is meant to show someone's energy for the day and how much every activity takes of that energy using spoons. So say I start the day with 5 spoons. For me, showering easily takes at least 2 spoons. Eating, something that's supposed to give you energy, takes another spoon. Going to an appointment, at least a spoon. And then taking care of my pets is another spoon. Well, now I'm spoonless. This means I literally have no energy for the rest of the day. And it's not just being tired. I am bedridden with how my body has no energy left. And energy is one thing. Spoonies, or people who are chronically ill, also have their plethora of symptoms. Personally, I have lupus, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or EDS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, and a vascular compression syndrome, just to name a few. So every single day because of that, I have a mixture of relentless spinal pain, extreme fatigue, what we lightly call brain fog, but is actually cognitive impairment, hair loss, mouth sores, skin rashes, joint pain, problems eating, and so on. When a healthy person becomes sick, you'll assume you'll go to the doctor, get an answer, pick up your medication, and then feel better. But for the chronically ill, our conditions have no cure. There may be medicines or treatments, but they don't actually get rid of the problem. They're just there for the symptoms. And finding a doctor who wants to treat you is actually very difficult. You are consistently gaslit by those who are supposed to help you. We are constantly told the symptoms are all in our heads. For most of my conditions, I had to be the one that researched the potential diagnosis, took it to the right doctors, and had the right testing so that they could confirm it. If I didn't do that, like a lot of others, everything would have remained labeled as anxiety. I now have a very good memory team, but it took way too long to find them. And I'm not alone. Lupus has an average of 6 years before a diagnosis is made. 6 years. Then we're told by healthy people what we should do. Try yoga, eat better, don't eat gluten, take this vitamin, keep moving, lose weight, gain weight. Something you're doing must be causing it. Learning who I am now and forcing myself to believe that I am more than the high work ethic that my body no longer allows has been a struggle. Every additional diagnosis brings on validation, but also a steady reminder that things will never be the same. Society calls me lazy, especially since they can't see what plagues me. I was built to be a strong, independent woman, but now I'm dependent on my husband to do the simplest of tasks. To all my fellow Spoonies here today and listening at home, I see you. I know your pain, and at the same time, I know I will never know your pain. You are more than your ability to work. You are a warrior. You fight through your symptoms that would send a healthy person to the ER every day. You brave a new medication that could help, but you know will plague you with terrible side effects. You continue to push to keep and find good doctors who actually listen to you and understand at least one of your ailments. And at the same time, you're exhausted. You don't know if you have the energy to keep trying. You don't know if you can make it through one more failed appointment, one more letdown by a procedure you thought would help, one more friend distancing themselves from you because you had to bail on plans yet again. I know you can, and I know I can, because we are more than our disability.
Our reading today is an excerpt from Rebecca Tausig's book, Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary, Resilient, Disabled Body. Ableism thunders in the background of every conversation, every story, every building. It's the atmosphere we breathe, a body of principles, rules we live by. We learn its tenets like we learn about good and evil with subtle and consistent reinforcement. Not only do we avoid questioning them, it doesn't even occur to us that there's anything to question. Ableism pushes assumptions like some bodies, minds, modes are inherently and always preferable to others. Hearing speaking is always better than deafness signing. Bipeds walking is definitely superior to paraplegics wheeling. Each of us has a whole, unmarred, perfect body that we were meant to have. The paralyzed, autistic, deaf version is just a sadder, lesser version of that original intent. This tenet is wrapped up in narratives of fat, aging, gender non-conforming bodies too, of course. The worth of a body is measured by its capacity for work and/or the longevity of life it's able to sustain. Bodies are products. Scars, breaks, and changes in function make that product less valuable. Dependence is inferior to independence. Only some bodies require help, and those bodies are a burden. It's only practical to shape the world with the majority in mind, and there is such a thing as a majority. Disability is always a deficit. The world would be a better place if we could figure out a way to eliminate it entirely, and on and on and on. If you find yourself nodding along with any of these ableist beliefs, that makes sense. They've been part of our daily lives since infancy. They've made us terrified of aging, wrinkles, belly fat, age spots, sagging skin, and stretch marks. They've turned us into work machines who regularly abuse our bodies to demonstrate our value. Sleep less, work harder, always. They've made us ashamed to ask for help, to take medication, to use mobility aids. They stifle our capacity to imagine other ways of being in the world. In order to be okay, we must always be the ideal human, young, smooth, tight, fit, radiant, spry, boundless, unstoppable, independent. Because if we start to spill out of this tiny little mold, what will it mean? Who will we be? People with disabilities have always been part of my family. My dad's mom had multiple sclerosis. She started using a wheelchair when my dad was about 15. And By the time I was born, she was paralyzed from the neck down. She died when I was only 6. My Aunt Arnell, my great-grandmother's daughter from her first marriage, had polio when she was about 18. During my life, she used a wheelchair to get around. She also had facial paralysis on one side, and my forever memory of her is her left elbow was always on the arm of her wheelchair so she could push up her lip before the saliva fell. My Aunt Arnell was also the hospital administrator in McMinnville. At her memorial service, and I was shocked I didn't know this before, I learned that before the Americans with Disabilities Act, she, who needed professional clothing before online shopping was a thing, convinced Macy's and Nordstrom's that they needed to put in an accessible dressing room so she could try on clothes before she bought them. I don't have many memories of my Grandma Marion, but my dad told stories about her often. And he especially loved the story about how the nurses at the hospital always loved her when she went there for respite care because she told all the best dirty jokes. He also told a story about his dad bought him a car because he drove my grandmother around a lot. And Grandpa came home with this convertible for Dad, and Dad thought it was super cool. And Marion, wheels out there, and she said, "What's this button?" and pushes a button on the front seat, and the front seat immediately laid completely flat. And she looked at her husband and said, "You are taking that back now." Absolutely not. My running line about my family's genetics is if you make it to 60, you're good till 90. Until my mom's generation, this seemed to be true. I never met my mom's parents, who died before I was born. My uncle died in his 40s when his fishing boat overturned in a storm the weekend I graduated from high school. My Grandma Marion died when I was 6. But I was blessed with a lot of quite elderly relatives as well. My great-grandma Stanard died at 98. She drove until she was 93. She lived in a home alone in a house that was later converted to an adult care home until she was 95. My great-grandma Reynolds died at 93, and my great-auntie Margie died at 97. And from the time I was 4 until I was about 10, I lived in the same town as all of these relatives. Disability and old age all seemed fairly normal to me. And while age or physical condition meant that they couldn't do some things, I was aware of so many more things that they could do. To me, this was just another way of having a body. A body that was sometimes limited, to be sure, but a body nonetheless. Rebecca Tausig, the author I read earlier, is a woman who writes on Substack and Instagram with the title Sitting Pretty. She is an English professor, a wife and mother, the author of that book, and she's also a childhood cancer survivor. She had cancer when she was a toddler, and it left her with very limited use of her legs. She's used a wheelchair since she was about 7, and writes movingly of life with her particular body, but also of life with a body in general. We all have them. They all can do some things and can't do others. As a petite, cisgendered, straight white woman who grew up middle class, she recognizes that her struggles are not the same as some other folks's, but also that disability is seen as wrong or tragic in a different way than some other conditions are seen. Few of us would say someone of a different race was born in the wrong body, or that this is a tragic event. But she writes of teaching a class of 12th graders at a private school. She was teaching a class that she got to design called Cripples, Freaks, and Invalids, the marginalized body as seen in the stories we tell. She worried that these incredibly bright kids would run through the material too fast, but she was frustrated to realize the really low level of understanding of disability. Inevitably, these kids, even those who could understand that being gay was just a different way of being, different but neutral, saw disability as exclusively tragic. There was no understanding of difference as something that could have positive outcomes. There was no understanding that something like universal design could alleviate much of the difficulty disabled people face. Just the idea that not being able to walk or hear or think the same way everyone else does is inherently less than. And additionally, they weren't afraid to tell her to her face that disability wasn't something they needed to think about. It didn't affect them. Their 17-year-old bodies worked just fine, thank you. This is not something I'm ever going to have to deal with. No need to think about any other way of being. She tried using the example of a woman who was deaf and walked into a room where everyone was signing. She could communicate with everyone in there. They got her jokes, they could share information. Now imagine that you enter that same room with your hearing ears, she said. So when you enter that space, you're the one who lacks access, can't communicate, is on the outside, right? The person sitting in the disabled seat is flipped depending on the context. It just so happens that most spaces are designed for your access, but there are other ways this could go, she said. But the woman in this scenario still can't hear, a student of hers insists. I don't see a lack of hearing could ever be considered anything other than a deficit, a biological defect. It might be the first time someone has taken this position to my face, Tausig says. She writes movingly about the challenges finding affordable housing as a disabled person and the constant juggling act required to earn just enough money to live, but not so much that you lose your health insurance. She writes of her frustration at people's assumptions that a woman who uses a wheelchair must not be a sexual being, that anyone with a disabled partner must be a saint inherently, and her frustration at unwanted, unasked for help. She writes, "This is the power of the one-dimensional, deeply embedded ableist script in our culture. Some bodies are victims, others are heroes. Some bodies need help, other bodies give help. We tell and retell these stories, and we feel really good when we do so. It's cherished, revered, beloved, like royal weddings or animals of different species cuddling. And we cannot get enough of stories that involve kindness and disabilities." But while sometimes that kindness is wanted and helpful, heavy doors are a decent example, many, many times it's not wanted or needed. At least 8 times a day, I yank and throw, pull and twist my wheelchair in and out of my affectionately beat up 2007 Toyota Corolla, she writes. After more than a decade of practice, the entire ordeal takes about 30 seconds. But when people want to help, it takes 6 times longer to explain it to them. It is irritating when total strangers who know nothing about her yell, "Don't fall!" when she is doing something she does every day just fine, thank you very much. It's even more irritating when total strangers ask to pray for her healing at Starbucks when she's just trying to do her work. Stella Young, who has since died, was a comedian and a journalist who used a wheelchair, and is famous for a TED Talk where she talks about how when she was 15, someone in her town wanted to nominate her for a Community Achievement Award. But, as her parents told them, she hasn't actually achieved anything yet. She went to school, got good grades, fought with her sisters, and watched lots of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Just because she did that sitting down did not make her special. She spoke of teaching a law class to older high school students, and 20 minutes in, a student asked when she was going to start with the inspirational speech. He'd never seen a disabled person as anything other than a motivational speaker. Not as a doctor or a teacher or a manicurist. Her point was that merely existing as a disabled person is not designed for your inspiration. oh, my life must not be bad, or worse yet, you have no excuses because you have 2 legs that work. My line on that is, just because someone somewhere has a brain tumor doesn't mean you never get to complain about your headache. Stella Young calls it inspiration porn, where the sight of a disabled person doing something very ordinary is packaged for your inspiration. She says, let's create a world where it's easier for disabled people to move through that world because ramps and larger bathroom stalls exist instead of giving them a medal for doing what everyone else does. Rebecca Tausig gets even more irritated when non-disabled person being nice to disabled person goes viral on the internet. She acknowledges that in a messed up world, it's good to see people being nice to each other. But the assumption that one nice person asking the kid with Down syndrome to prom or talking to a deafblind person on the airplane is going to fix systemic issues is the same kind of white savior mentality that we see in so many movies, where inspirational stories about people of color always center on the white person who helps them, See the Help, The Blind Side, Hidden Figures, and so many others. Why do we assume that the center of the story is the helper? The hero-victim language doesn't serve us well. Tausig writes, in the ableist script that drives so many of our interactions, disabled people are either cast as helpless victims who need a hero's help to survive, or inspirational figures who inspire non-disabled characters to be grateful for their beautiful, able-bodied lives. The reality is, of course, much more complicated. Like anyone else, she writes, disabled people are both capable and in need of some help. You have to pay attention if you want to understand. The hero-victim language also implies, like Tausig bemoans, the fact that people are seen as disabled or not disabled. The world is not such a binary place. Like gender and sexual orientation, disability is often a continuum, and just because you or I aren't disabled now doesn't give us any assurance that we will never be. Statistics tells us that about 16% of people worldwide have a disability, with mobility impairments at the top of that list. In the United States, the figure goes up to 28% of people with cognitive impairments, including dementia, just inching out mobility impairments. Of course, some people are born with cognitive impairments, but for many of us, dementia or brain injury or long COVID can come into play at any time. Mobility impairments can include birth defects like cerebral palsy or spina bifida, but can also be the result of an accident or traumatic injury or age-related arthritis or disease processes. Further adding to the spectrum classification is the question of how disabled do you have to be to qualify as disabled? My daughter Mika has several of the same issues as Heather does. Ehlers-Danlos, which is a connective tissue disorder, and POTS, positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. She also has chronic migraines, and she's autistic. Some of these disabilities are a core part of her identity, like the autism, which she sees as just a different way to be with its own gifts. Some, like the migraines, she'd be happy to live without. She works as a home healthcare aide, which she loves, but not full-time. But now that she doesn't qualify for disability benefits, which is fine. But now that she's over 25, she gets her health insurance through the Oregon Health Plan, which is a huge gift. But if work requirements go through for Medicaid, that could throw a big wrench into things. She can work, but she can work 12 to 15 hours a week, not 20. How disabled is disabled enough? We all have bodies. I am willing to bet that every single one of us can tell us something we like about our bodies and probably something we don't like about our bodies. Just because our bodies work well now is no guarantee that they always will. My great Auntie Margie started to go blind from macular degeneration in her late 80s. My mom started to go blind from the same thing at 70. Her rheumatoid arthritis meant that it was very hard for her to get around the last few years of her life. I both fear and accept my genetic legacies, and I wonder how my body will age. I take care of it the best I can. I'm going to close with a final reading from Rebecca Tausig, who writes, "An accessible future is shaped by the fundamental understanding that we all have bodies, that those bodies are different from one another, and that each is worthy of profound admiration, care, and respect. The aging body, the female body, the body in pain, the injured or sick body, the fat or short or asymmetrical body, the racially stigmatized body, the body that needs to use the bathroom, the blind, deaf, paralyzed, tired, non-binary, hungry, bleeding, transitioning, seizing body. Every single one. In this future, people won't be punished or shamed, isolated, excluded, cast to the fringes, or told to go around the back or to find another toilet because of that body. Bodies, in all their variant forms, will be considered, allowed, and welcomed. Our vast differences will be thought of as we design our structures, our buildings, our healthcare, our transportation, our clothing, our classrooms, our spaces of work and play, our notions of love and romance, parenthood and friendships. In the future, we will not be encouraged to silence our bodies. This future won't appear out of thin air. We have to create it, little by little, as we practice listening to, caring for, and respecting all of our bodies. Please, she writes, let's create this world for each other. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.